All right, welcome to episode 2 of our Bible Nerd series. As you well know, we did not have a teaching on Jonah on Sunday night. Instead, we just hung out and played games together, and it was a lot of fun. We ate ice cream. So I had to make up content for this episode, and in light of Valentine's Day being yesterday we're filming this on Tuesday, I thought it would be cool if we had a conversation about dating and marriage and what the Bible has to say about those two things. So I've brought on Carson Branham, the Carson Branham.
Hello, Carson.
Our brand new worship pastor at LNBC. It's official. You have a title.
Yes.
And then Jenelle Venters, our children's pastor. It's amazing.
Glad you're here.
Yeah.
Glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you guys for doing
It's a cool
this.
group.
On short notice, too. I think I texted you guys this morning, maybe.
Yeah. Well, if you
Or-
know me,
This was last
you know
night.
I'm
last
never
night.
at a loss for words usually. So
Right.
talking is my specialty.
Yeah. And that's what these conversations are great for, just being
Yeah.
off the cuff, no agenda. Well, I think there's a lot that could be said about dating and marriage. We could sit here and talk about it for probably hours on end. But I think we want this to be geared towards students and helping them where they're at, meeting them where they're at. So I want to open up talking about if you could go back to your middle school, high school self, what would you say to them about dating?
Yeah, well, it's going to be closer to Carson going back in time to that place,
Right.
Than it is me. So
Right.
Does that mean I need to go first?
I think I don't
Okay,
know.
that's fine.
Yeah, usually it's ladies first, but we'll
cool,
make an
we'll do that. Okay.
exception.
Well, I'm trying to think of a non-ridiculous way to say this, but honestly, I would tell myself just don't. Like in all love and all honesty,
I would
like
second that. Yeah.
I gained next to nothing from dating in middle and high school. Like just totally being honest.
I would even take it a step further and say that it did more damage to me
Yeah.
than anything.
Yeah, and not that there's anything implicitly wrong
Yeah.
with dating in high school, but just me personally, it was more damaging probably for my soul to date in middle and high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think probably just, the temptation of sin and lust and things like of that world, like were super damaging to me in a way that I don't think when you're, 14, 15, 16, 17,
Right.
you don't quite grasp the actions. You don't quite grasp what's happening.
And the longevity of sometimes
Of
even
those effects.
consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
That's a good
Yeah.
point. We need to come back to that.
Yeah.
What-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to
say,
ask,
I would actually
when-
kind of second that. But
In that time period, middle school and high school, were you following Jesus all of those years, some of those years, none of those years?
I didn't start dating anyone until I was in high school, and it was awkwardly around the same time that I started to follow Jesus. It's like I was like fighting the back and forth from like the world, as in like those I went to school with in high school,
Right.
like said like, oh, you're weird if you don't have
Yep.
a girlfriend or boyfriend. It's weird if you're not, doing these things. But at the same time, like the way of Jesus seemed to run opposite to that. So I was kind of like, this is weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's real though. There's a ton of cultural pressure
Yeah.
when you're that age. And I'm sure it's the same today. Just in conversations I've had with students, it's definitely the same today. That there's this cultural pressure that like you need to be in a relationship, and I don't know where it comes from.
Yeah, to the point that like, so I started following Jesus at the beginning of high school. Though I grew up in the church life. But even me, by the time I got to college, I was in my third relationship. And I remember that like that cultural kind of expectation was so permeated into my thinking that even me as like a follower of Christ, I remember like looking at people weirdly when I like first got to college, when like my fellow freshmen in college, when they would be like, yeah, I've never dated anyone. I was even like, that's weird. Like, what? You know, why? Like I don't think we understand how much the culture really permeates the way you think.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with that. And honestly, like if you took that same person who's been following Christ just as long as me, like they were probably in a better spot spiritually than I was, and I'm sitting there judging them. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
I would say that culture actually starts like when kids are like 1 and 2 and 3 years old. I see it. Growing up, it was, oh, is that your boyfriend? Parents even kind of inadvertently putting that into their kids. And, plenty of times that I have heard that phrase, even in preschool. Oh, that's their little boyfriend, and just a little kind of joke about it. But it's ingrained, and then there's this expectation, and then you think, well, what's wrong with me if I don't have that? So then it starts shaping your self-image even. So that's, I think, what I was going to answer that question is if I could go back and tell myself something, it would be like, stop making your self-image and your self-worth hinge on what some boy thinks of you. And because it shapes the way that you make decisions, it shapes the way that you want to dress and the way that you want to act. And you're seeing it all throughout culture in everything you see on TV and now in social media. It is rampant, that missteps for who young women are supposed to be. And, we're image bearers, but the image that the world wants us to adopt and to take as our own is not one that is Christ following, and it's damaging.
Yeah. I think part of the cultural impact too is we don't talk about it this way, but it's rooted in envy and jealousy. You see other people in a relationship, and you think, I'm missing out on something by not being in one. Or
FOMO.
Yeah.
If you're missing out.
I want
Nice.
I want what they have. And I think social media just intensifies all this because you only see the good of these people's relationships.
The perfect image of it.
Right.
Which it's not.
you don't see
Right.
the fact that they
Yeah.
just had a fight yesterday.
Yeah.
That they had an awkward encounter the day before. You
Yeah.
don't
Right.
see any of that.
Yeah. Like if you go scroll on mine and Haley's Instagram, all you'll see is happy, smiling pictures,
Yeah.
wedding pictures, all the good times.
Yeah.
Not, the times where we're not talking each other before we go to bed because of some spat we've had, right?
Yeah.
That's just not what's on display. And I think in order for us to get at why should we even engage in dating, or why do I want this so bad, we have to strip everything down and look at the root of it. Like what is it inside of me that is making me want to do this? And that kind of ties into what, if I could go back and have a conversation with middle school and high school Tucker. First off, he was a goofball. Second off, what I would say is you are looking for satisfaction, fulfillment, and joy in trying to be in a relationship. And yet you're disguising it by saying you're pursuing a good thing. I talked a little bit about my testimony on the last episode, but through middle school and most of high school, I would have said I was a Christian, but I wasn't following Jesus at all. So I would still try to portray this like I'm doing the right things, I'm a good kid. I would use religious language, and the Bible pretty clearly sets up marriage as like a good thing to pursue.
Right.
And I think dating should always be pursued in light of marriage being the goal. And so when I was that age, I always wanted to be in a relationship, but I would tell myself that I was pursuing this good thing because I wanted to be in that relationship as hope to get married. But then that also created this thing in me where it was like I put this pressure on a dating relationship when I was 14, 15 years old that it's supposed to lead to marriage. And then it kept me in an unhealthy relationship living in sin way longer than it should have, and blinded me to all the issues that were in it because I thought I got to be in this for the long haul. So even this religious framework I had that was separated from actually following Jesus harmed my view on dating and marriage. So if I could go back, I would say you will never find satisfaction, fulfillment, joy, any of that in a dating relationship unless you first find those things in Christ alone.
Not to mention too, like, I mean, it's even more complicated when you have a teenager who follows Jesus trying to date a non-believer, right? Who are both have a different idea of like where their satisfaction, where their completion, where their enjoyment comes from, right? Like the Christian hopefully should understand that, but the other one will not at all. So like they're setting themselves up for failure just from the beginning of that.
I would say also for me, I would come back to myself in those years and just kind of first of all shake myself because I did a lot of dumb things too, and put worth in things that weren't necessarily worthy of my time and consideration. But dating for me back then was more of a distraction to what God had for me in that moment. And I think sometimes, we're looking forward because we can't wait to get to the next thing. Our birthdays even set us up to that. So at 13, you're no longer a kid, you're now a teenager. And then 16, there's a vehicle in your future, hopefully, or driving and a little bit more independence. And then, 18 and you're going to start college. Like we set ourselves up to, we can't wait for that next thing. And so we try to rush ahead before we're really ready for it. And I think that was my thinking back then was I needed to be in a relationship but why? Because I'm not getting married at 16. That is not the goal. I wouldn't want to get married at 18. And, so I guess trying to rush ahead, I missed the things that God was trying to do with me right then and teach me right then because I was distracted by relationships and the goals that he didn't have for me right then. Classes, I didn't have to work too hard in high school. I wish that I would have worked harder because I would have gotten more scholarship money. I would have been able to kind of hear a little bit more about what direction he wanted me to go into because it took me quite a bit of time in college to really land on what I thought he was leading me to. So I think rushing ahead was more of a distraction. And something I told my girls was when they were growing up is like, keep your eye on what God has for you right now, because if you are looking forward to those next things, you're going to miss the beautiful things that he's put in front of you right now. The friendships that I had in high school that I didn't really invest myself in as much as I could have because I was, obsessed with dating or, what I was going to do for prom and those kind of things. And those were good things too, but it was never even on my radar to go with a group of friends to prom because, you needed to have your date and all of those things. So I would say don't rush ahead and miss out on the blessings that God has for you right now.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I think part of the issue too is we just don't have a good view of singleness. We view it as a disease or
or it's just an interim period.
Yeah, or like this unwanted thing.
Yeah, not something that oh, God can use me right now. He can accomplish something in my life right now.
Right.
You're not it's not a placeholder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we view it as a placeholder of okay.
Until the right one comes along.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we also view it as there's certain things that I can't overcome or I can't do until I'm going to be in this relationship. We try to justify continuing in some sense in singleness because we think we need to be in a relationship for them to be solved. And that can be very dangerous too. But I know for me personally, it wasn't until I became content in singleness and seeing it as a good thing and focusing on what I could do for God in that season that I found Haley, that I met Haley. And then, the rest is history. Now we've been married for a few months. And I know countless other examples of this in some of my friends' lives. And some of them had very long periods of singleness, into almost their 30s. And I think that is a testament to God's not going to give us something if we're not ready for it.
Right.
If we don't know how to be content in Christ when we're single, we won't know how to be content in Christ when we're in a relationship and married. which is needed.
Yeah, that's
And I think that's what
That's
causes
tweet-worthy right there.
the
That's a
downfall
good-
of so
good quote.
many marriages, even in the church.
Yeah.
Right? Like we
Yeah.
like to poke fingers at like the divorce rate, like
Right.
of non
Yeah.
Christ followers. Like it's just as bad, really,
just as
like in the
high,
church,
yeah.
you know? And I think that's a
Yeah.
huge part. But going back to what you said there are some things, you know, that you can't do until you're married. And that is true. I mean, there are some things that come with marriage, but there are some things that you can't do when you're married that you can do when you're
Yeah.
single.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think
amen.
we totally miss that, right? Like you are not, you know, tethered to a person. Like you're not bound to, like, you know, share your schedule with them, do these things. Like you can just do what, you know, like wherever the Lord leads you. Like you don't have to communicate that with another person.
Right.
And I don't think we really talk about that.
Yeah.
Like that's a big
Yeah.
thing.
That's true. And you
And-
think about combining your finances. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
you don't have to check in with somebody on how you spend your money. You are responsible for it and making those decisions and just whatever kind of you want to think, what
Yeah.
things you want to focus on.
Yeah. And here's another thing I think I would go back and say to myself is I learned how to have friendships with girls when I was content being single. And so me and Haley started as just friends. And I think the best way to know if you're compatible with someone enough to marry them is to be friends first. To not dive head first into putting the pressure of dating on it, but to have like a friendship starting out that develops into something more. And I remember in middle school and high school, any girl that I would somewhat have a friendship with, I would start thinking about, is this someone I can date? Right off the bat, without even like giving it a chance of, you know, what would it look like for us to just be friends? And it wasn't until probably I guess it was my sophomore year in college, that I kind of became content being single, and then I was able to start having friendships with girls without the pressure or anything like that. And it was actually a really healthy thing for me.
Yeah.
And
I totally resonate with that. Like Madeline was the first girl that like I was friends with
Yeah.
before. Like every other girlfriend that I had, like we were never really friends before. Like we just started.
You were thinking of the dating before the friendship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
It's
that was the
horse
first
before
one.
the cart,
Yeah,
kinda.
for sure.
Yeah, that's how Houston and I started out too. Like, and there was no thought that we would date. He came in the first time I met him. He had an orange tie on, and I was like, "He's a
Vols.
Tennessee fan," and that's a deal breaker when you're a Wildcat, you know. But
I got
now I've
the
grown,
orange
and so I
Celsius
can
here.
accept them now. But that wasn't what it was at all. It was his college. You know, they were the Georgetown Tigers, so that's why he had it on. But I judged him, and but we started out for like 6 months. We were just friends, and then just something switched. I don't know. I don't know what it was, but something switched, and then we started thinking through it in that way, and it was we never looked back.
so, you know, trying to put myself back in a teenager's shoes, you look around and you see everyone else getting in these relationships. You see them, they seem happy. It seems like it's going well. And so you look at that and you say, well, if they're doing it, why can't I do it? And I think that's the riff with teenagers and dating is it's prevalent among the people around them. And so it's hard to not jump into it or to think that there's anything wrong with it. So how do you guard against like falling into this pressure to just think or to pursue dating at that age?
I think one of the things is recognizing that not having, you know, these relationships can help kind of guard the unity of your friends. Like, I think there are a few exceptions, but by and large, when you have these awkward drama, you know, breakups in high school, inevitably they just destroy friend groups. You know, when she breaks up with him, you know, like all his guys are mad at her, and you know, people take sides, and it's just it's just messy in a way that, you know, if you didn't have this, when really it's so dumb, like literally it's like a 7-8 month relationship just destroys a group of
years
friends.
long friendship.
Yeah, like you know,
Yeah.
so just recognizing like the damage that it can do to not really even just the two of you. I mean, it really
Yeah.
you know
disrupts
affects the
everything.
community around you.
Right.
So
Right.
I think that's huge.
Yeah. to kind of, do you have anything you want to add to
No,
that
I would
question?
echo that. I think that's super. You don't want to make drama where there's no need to have drama, and that does kind of take away from. I think I keep coming back to like Romans 12:2, and don't be conformed to what the image of the world is trying to put into you, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And it is like to guard against yourself. It sounds like the little biblical churchy girl answer, but it's true to go back and, what does God have for me right now? And what is he teaching me right now? And how can I live in the moment that I'm in and enjoy where I'm at without trying to leap forward several years that I'm not really ready for yet, just being in the moment now.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to attempt to put a bow on the first part of this conversation. I think my answer to the question is a warning from my own life. Mm-hmm. So how do you guard against this temptation to want to jump into dating and be in that world well before you're in a place to get married? And from my own life, I learned the hard way that the decisions you make in dating relationships in middle school, high school, whatever it is, will, without a doubt, have an impact on your relationship with your future spouse and who you end up marrying.
Yes.
And you will have to untangle those things. You'll have to wrestle through those things. It's going to cause conflict in your future relationship. And so my caution, or my antidote towards guarding against the temptation to jump into dating is to hear from me telling you that the decisions you're making right now, the choices you're making right now will have consequences later on, whether you think they will or not. Now, I want to come alongside that and say, we've been talking a lot from our experience, our past experience, about how we think it's wise, not to rush into dating when you're a teenager. And I want to have grace because I know when I was in high school and middle school, I wouldn't have heard anything like that, and I still would have done it anyways. And I made the mistakes that I made, And so I also want to say to you guys that are watching this that you probably will still get in relationships. And there's going to come a time where you mess up and you make some stupid mistake, and it may have consequences that play out in your future marriage. However, what I have found in my experience is that the grace of Jesus is greater than that.
Yes.
And that even though you may experience some difficulty and challenge because of the choices that you are making or will make, God's going to graciously teach you more about himself through that experience. And he's going to, in your future marriage, give you a picture of his grace through the way that you and your spouse work through those things and untangle those things. And so I want to be sensitive to that. I understand, as we're sitting here saying these things, that some of you are listening to it and be like, yeah, that sounds great, but I'm still probably going to date. And I understand
I can't stop
that.
thinking about it, or, it's...
Yeah. And it's just hard for you to avoid it. Maybe you're just so charming and you have people hitting you up left and right and you just can't resist it because you love the attention. But understand this. If you do choose to participate in dating, jump into it, odds are you're going to make mistakes and you're going to mess up. And I want you to know that as a student ministry, we're here to support you through that. We're here to help you come out the other side better, stronger for it. Because I know this, I'm the husband and the man that I am today because of what I learned through failing and through making mistakes. And so there's hope. God has the power and the ability, because he rose from the grave, to take the mistakes that we make and to take the times in our lives where we just acted unwise and to turn them into something good. And that's kind of how I want to wrap up that first section. But now I want to talk about marriage. If that is the goal of dating, I think it's important to have a conversation about it. So my question to you guys is, what is the most powerful thing that marriage has taught you or changed about you, since you've been married?
I learned so much being married. I'm the baby of the family, so I feel like I was a little selfish, and you don't realize it at the time, but I think, and Houston taught me this more than, I just can't believe how selfless he was. He was such a selfless person, and, he sacrificed constantly. So what I learned from marriage was selflessness and sacrifice, and it took arguments for me to see sometimes. We would most people are like, oh my gosh, he would never fight with you. You guys were so sweet and so nice, and he was so nice, and he was. But we would have little knockdown, drag out fights every once in a while where I just wanted my way, and I didn't realize it was me being selfish. I thought it was just me trying to do the right thing, but. Sometimes you have to cave, even if you think you're right. Sometimes you have to cave and hear what your spouse is saying and work through that and talk through it. It's not necessarily a black and white answer. You have to learn how to communicate. So I learned how to be a little more selfless, even though I thought I was selfless. I really wasn't. And I learned how to communicate and to hear what he was saying. I used to tell him, I feel like I have to walk on eggshells when I talk to you. But he would want me to say, please and things, or, ask nicely for things instead of in a rush. I'm a little impatient sometimes. And so he would let me ask, but he wouldn't do some of the things that I would ask him to do, and it was mostly because of the way that I was asking. And so he taught me how to be a little bit more considerate, a little less selfish, and a little bit more patient along the way.
Yeah, so it sounds
like the opposite of I relate to you right now.
Yeah. And it sounds like, in your answer, there's this mutual sharpening of one another in marriage, where the conflict and the friction that's created by you being different people actually creates this growth, because the more we're around people that are different from us, think differently than us, act differently than us, that's what produces growth and change.
And
so
having
that's really
that
cool.
humble spirit to kind of okay, well, let me self-reflect. Let me look at myself here, and how am I being selfish? And having the I guess the will and the desire to have those harder conversations, and not necessarily take emotion out of it, because it was always they were always some of them were heated, but having and taking those moments. And we actually even kind of in the beginning of our marriage, we had conversations okay, well, when we're going to get into it, because we get along all the time, but when we have fights, what are our boundaries in those fights? There were deal breaker things that we wouldn't say to each other. There was, which is a maturing as well. I think sometimes in this world we throw around, oh, I hate that, I can't stand that, or, but we had boundaries even in our fighting. So, just kind of how to communicate better, how to, give more of yourself than what you're sometimes even getting in return, and how to respect each other.
That's good. What about you, Carson?
A couple of things kind of rattled off. The first one that I thought of was just how sufficient Jesus is. I think Madeline Marie Branham is the greatest person that I have ever met.
She's pretty awesome.
Perfect in just about every way, and yet she still can't be all that I want her to be. You know what I'm saying? And I think it really took God genuinely giving the best person for Carson Eric Branham, and he's still okay, now you still see that it's me. So I think he really learned that.
That's good.
So that's the first thing. The second thing, and we kind of talked about this in our community group a few weeks ago, but I think we were talking about Taylor preached on the end of Galatians about how sins of the flesh and the things you do, good or bad, positive and negative, don't affect just you and God. They affect other people. And if you really want a good representation of that, marriage.
Marriage.
Like, and I think I, casually knew that. And I think, being in college and being around a group of guys who loved me, loved Jesus, and we really held up and supported one another, I began to see it there, but I didn't really see that until I got married. Like, good and bad, the things that I do, the decisions that I make, or don't make, like, impact her. Like, and I see it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So I've learned that. But then 3, I like to think that I've become a kinder person. Hopefully, I don't know. Maybe you guys
Madeline has definitely helped you.
has softened me up a little bit. I don't know.
No.
I don't know. I think that there's and maybe there's a gender thing there, but I think men's like kind of default tone is like just kind of rigid. It's a little bit, like if we're not actively trying to become more like Jesus, more kind, more gentle, more lowly, like I think that we'll just kind of stay there. And so, I think that, through conversations that I've had with her, where I've really upset her, I've hurt her feelings, and I'm like, wait, what did I do? I have no idea that I've done something like that. I think I've learned like, I need to really change the way I communicate with not really just her, but just people in general, making sure that I'm not being this calloused, rigid, kind of jerk. A lot.
I will agree with kind of what you're saying. Marriage has made me much more empathetic.
Yes.
Haley's very empathetic, and I am not. And that has caused a ton of friction in our marriage. And for a while, it was frustrating for me. But now it's like, I kind of see like, okay, it's meeting people where they're at. And, you may disagree with the way that they're processing and handling something, but they're feeling this way right now, and you're just going to add fuel to the fire if you respond to a certain way. And I've learned a lot in that.
That's funny. That's one of Houston's phrases. Like he would say, you can pour water on this or you can pour gasoline on it. And sometimes I would pour gasoline intentionally just because, but yeah.
Yeah, and for me, I think the best thing I've learned from marriage is Paul lays it out in Ephesians 5. Hold on.
Come on.
No, it's not Ephesians 5, is it?
If it's like marriage, then it's Ephesians 5.
Oh, yeah.
Like
it's just later in the past.
Okay.
I just had to flip the page. I'm dumb. But
It's even highlighted.
Paul's writing to the Ephesian church, and he's in this run of talking about first 3 chapters. He kind of sets up like, this is what Jesus has done for us. This is who Jesus is. And then the last 3 chapters is kind of his, now this is how you live in response to that. And he gives this passage about marriage, and he says, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, because the husband is the head of the wife, and as Christ is the head of the church, he is the Savior of the body. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives are to submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her, to make her holy, cleansing her with the washing of water by the word. He did this to present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or anything like that, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands are to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hates his own flesh, but provides and cares for it, just as Christ does for the church, since we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This mystery is profound, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. To sum up, each one of you is to love his wife as himself, and the wife is to respect her husband. And this is a passage that has some controversy just with the usage of the word submit, right? But I think what's important to frame it in is the verse right before, as he talks about this mutual submission in the church, whether it's male, female, there's this submitting to one another. Then you give this, and I like how it said, it's about respect. You give this respect to one another. And it goes vice versa, right? You need that on both ends. But what this passage has really become real for me in is that through a lot of me failing in marriage, I've realized, like, unless my soul, mindset and my heart, my purpose in this relationship is to serve her, to deny myself and serve her, we will have problems.
Yeah.
And vice versa for her.
Vice versa.
If we're not both focused on dying to ourself, what we want, our desires, so that we can serve the other, that's where all of our problems come in.
Yeah.
And that has been just put on display for me time and time again because I failed at that. And it's been just a really good lesson for me. And it even changed the way I think about my job.
Yeah.
It changed the way I think about coming here to work every day. I first and foremost am called to be a servant in whatever I do.
Yeah.
Marriage, work, anything. And that's just been a really powerful thing for me to learn from marriage. That's probably a good place to wrap it up on. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to be a part of this discussion. And I hope this is a beneficial resource for you guys. And we'll pick back up talking about Jonah next week. So thank y'all for watching.